The hotel ballroom in Manhattan was packed. The annual entrepreneurship event organized by Carter Enterprises was known for attracting brilliant minds and young visionaries looking for opportunities. William Carter, heir and CEO of the corporate giant, observed the scene with the trained eye of a business predator. His tailored suit and impeccable posture made him seem untouchable. He liked it that way. Power, after all, came with the weight of being seen as a leader. In the back, a small crowd had gathered around a young man speaking passionately. William noticed a movement and decided to approach, more out of curiosity than anything else. As he got closer, he saw a young man in his early 20s with tousled brown hair, wearing a blazer that clearly had seen better days. He stood frozen, watching the way the young man spoke. It reminded him of someone from a long time ago. But what caught everyone's attention was his infectious energy. And that's why I believe sustainability is not just an ethical choice, but a strategic necessity for any company that wants to survive in the next 20 years. The young man declared, earning applause from the impromptu crowd. William crossed his arms, intrigued. As the applause died down, he approached. "Looks like you've captured their attention." His voice was firm, yet friendly. The young man turned, surprised to realize who had spoken. He blinked a few times before extending his hand, clearly trying to hide his nervousness. "Ethan Scott." "It's an honor, Mr. Carter." "The pleasure is mine, Ethan." William shook his hand firmly. "So, sustainability as a strategy. Do you think it's something a corporation the size of mine could really adopt?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. In fact, I believe companies of your size have a responsibility to lead this movement. You have the resources, the influence, and frankly, the moral obligation." William raised an eyebrow, impressed by the audacity. "Moral obligation?" He gave a small smile. "That doesn't sound like something that would impress shareholders." "Maybe not at first." Ethan tilted his head, adjusting his tone. "But imagine a strategy that combines profitability with a positive impact, reducing costs with renewable energy, gaining loyal customers through social initiatives, attracting talent who want to work for something bigger than just profits. Not only would that impress shareholders, but it would redefine the market." William chuckled, genuinely amused. "You certainly know how to sell an idea. Are you presenting a project here today?" Ethan shook his head, still smiling. "Not exactly. I'm here more to listen and learn, and of course, try to talk to people like you." "Well, you succeeded." William took one last look at Ethan's worn blazer before continuing. "Where did you study?" "Harvard, with a specialization in sustainable economics." The answer came quickly, but there was no arrogance, just quiet confidence. William fell silent for a few seconds, evaluating the young man. There was something in him that went beyond technical knowledge, a passion that seemed hard to find in the boardrooms of large corporations. He pointed to a quieter corner of the room. "Let's continue this conversation over there. I want to hear more about your ideas." The two sat down at a reserved table, with waiters discreetly serving glasses of wine. William leaned forward slightly, showing genuine interest. "So, Ethan, why did you choose this path? Sustainability, I mean. You could have chosen any other area of business." Ethan took a sip of water before responding. "My mother worked hard. Even though she received money from my father, she never settled. She was a housekeeper in several wealthy homes. And I remember one thing she always said, 'People who have more must do more.' That stayed with me. When I went to Harvard, I realized I wanted to work on something that would truly make a difference, not just fill pockets." William remained quiet, absorbing the words. There was something in the way Ethan spoke that touched a sensitive chord in him. "And do you think companies like mine can make a difference?" "I think you already are, but you could do so much more." Ethan answered without hesitation. "I know your company already invests in clean technology, but there's so much untapped potential. Initiatives that could transform entire markets and at the same time create a positive legacy." William relaxed in his chair, almost impressed with himself for being touched by that young idealist. Do you have anything concrete? An idea or plan I can look at? Ethan hesitated for a moment before opening his briefcase and pulling out a tablet. He swiped the screen until he found a graph showing market projections for renewable energy and operational efficiency. As he explained, his enthusiasm was palpable. William listened attentively, interrupting only to ask pointed questions. When Ethan finished, there was a gleam in William's eyes. "Ethan, you're young and idealistic. That's rare in the corporate world." He smiled slightly. "And honestly, I think that's exactly what we need." Ethan blinked, surprised. "You're saying that?" "I'm saying I want you on my team." William raised his wine glass in a celebratory gesture. "I have an opening for a strategic consultant in a new sustainability project. The salary is generous, and you'll have the opportunity to work directly with me." Ethan's eyes widened, disbelieving. It took him a few seconds before he responded, trying to maintain composure. I don't know what to say. This is amazing." William extended his hand again. "Say yes, and show up at my office Monday morning." Ethan shook his hand firmly, a huge smile on his face. "Yes, absolutely yes." As William moved on to greet other guests, Ethan stood there, looking at the crowd. He knew he had just taken a giant step toward his goal. Little did William know that this seemingly chance encounter carried secrets that would change their lives forever. The months following the event were intense. Ethan quickly became an indispensable figure within Carter Enterprises. His energy and creativity turned ideas into concrete actions, and projects that had previously been stalled began to take shape. William wasn't one to trust easily, but over time, Ethan's presence became a constant he valued. However, daily interaction brought more than just corporate progress. It also brought to light a series of unsettling coincidences that William began to notice, even without fully understanding them. Something about Ethan's behavior seemed familiar, almost like a distant echo. One afternoon, William was reviewing reports in his spacious office, surrounded by glass windows offering a panoramic view of New York. He was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in." Ethan entered with his tablet in hand and his usual smile. "I need 5 minutes if I can. I've got an idea for the energy efficiency project in the Houston branch." William gestured for him to sit. 5 minutes. "Go ahead." As Ethan explained, William observed him closely. There was something in his expression, the way his eyes lit up when talking about his ideas, that unsettled him in a way he couldn't define. When Ethan finished, William nodded. "This is good. Send the estimates to the finance department. We'll need concrete numbers for the board." "I'll do that today." Ethan hesitated for a moment before continuing. "By the way, I have a meeting with Jonathan tomorrow. I'm presenting the progress report for the last quarter." William raised an eyebrow. "Jonathan is hard to impress. Make sure you're prepared." Ethan gave a confident smile. "I'm always prepared." As the young man stood to leave, William called him. "Ethan." "Yes? Where are you from?" Again. "I don't remember asking before." The question seemed to catch Ethan off guard, but he responded quickly. "I'm from Ohio. Grew up in Columbus." "Why?" William shrugged. "Nothing. Just curious." "Keep up the good work." As the door closed, William stood still, lost in thought. Something didn't make sense. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out an old photograph, one of the few where his father appeared. He hated photos. It was a picture of him, still a teenager, beside his father, Robert Carter, and his mother. In the background, he recognized a woman, a housekeeper who had worked for them for a while, Mary Scott. That night, William couldn't sleep. The name Scott echoed in his mind. Mary Scott had worked for the Carter family for years, until one day, she disappeared without a trace. He never knew the details, but he remembered hearing snippets of conversations about a scandal involving her and his father. Now, with Ethan in the company, everything seemed to fall into place in a disturbing way. he resolved to uncover the truth. He hired a private investigator to gather information on Ethan and Mary Scott. 2 weeks later, the report was in his hands. He opened it with trembling hands, his heart heavy with expectation. The first pages confirmed what he feared. Ethan was Mary Scott's son, but the real shock came when he turned the next page. The name of the father listed in an old DNA test was Robert Carter. William felt the weight of the words fall on him like a ton of bricks. "He's my brother," he murmured to himself. In the following days, William became increasingly distracted. His mind was in turmoil. He oscillated between anger and guilt. His father, the man he had idolized in his youth, had kept such a big secret, something that directly affected his own life. At the same time, he felt a growing pain for Ethan, who had apparently been neglected for years, living on the fringes of what could have been a completely different life. Jonathan, his right-hand man and longtime friend, noticed a change. During an informal meeting, Jonathan asked, "William, is everything okay? You seem different." William took a deep breath. He didn't know if he could share the truth, but he needed an outlet. "Not exactly. I'm dealing with something complicated. Does this have to do with Ethan?" Jonathan asked perceptively. William stared at him, surprised. "What makes you say that? You've been paying a lot of attention to him lately. It's almost personal." William thought for a moment before deciding to be honest. "I found out that Ethan is my father's son." Jonathan's eyes widened. "You're saying he's your half-brother?" "Yes." William looked out the window, his voice heavy with emotion. "And he doesn't know it." Jonathan remained silent for a moment before asking, "What do you plan to do?" "I don't know." William shook his head, frustrated. "Part of me wants to confront him, but what if that pushes him away?" "Do you really think he would do that?" Jonathan asked cautiously. "I don't know what to believe, Jonathan. That's what's killing me." In the days that followed, William tried to act as if nothing had changed, but Ethan began to notice small changes. The magnate was more attentive, almost paternal at times. One afternoon, as the two were reviewing a project in the office, Ethan mentioned something that left William shaken. "You know, sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to grow up in a family like yours." William stared at him, feeling the weight of the words. He forced a smile. "Growing up in my family wasn't as glamorous as it seems." Ethan chuckled lightly. "Still, it must have been interesting." William paused, studying the young man with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Ethan, if you had the chance to change the past, would you?" The young man looked at him, surprised by the unexpected question. "I'm not sure. I think the past, however bad it may be, shapes who we are." William nodded slowly, reflecting. "Maybe you're right." The atmosphere around Ethan started to shift. If before he had been seen as a charismatic and idealistic young man, now there was something subtly different about his behavior. Those who worked closely with him noticed a sharper tone in his words, a determination that bordered on obsessive. While William continued to trust the young man blindly, Ethan saw the opportunity he had been waiting for his entire life. Late at night, in the Carter Enterprises office, Ethan was alone, sitting in front of a screen full of graphs and confidential reports. The sound of the keyboard echoed in the quiet room as he typed furiously, devising a plan that, if successful, would leave nothing of William's legacy intact. He murmured to himself, "You took everything from me, William. Now it's my turn." Ethan knew he had to act cautiously. His meticulous approach to William had not been in vain. He had spent his life planning this. He had access to privileged information, control over important decisions, and, most valuable of all, the magnate's trust. Every move he made within the company was calculated for a larger goal, a financial collapse that would leave William with nothing. The following week, Ethan began to implement the first phase of his plan. During a strategic meeting, he presented data that, at first glance, seemed to be a bold but promising step for the company. "If we shift some of our investments to emerging startups in the technology sector, we can diversify the risks and increase our returns." He gestured confidently, as the charts on the screen showed attractive projections. William nodded, impressed. This looks solid, but isn't it a risky move, considering the volatile market? It's a calculated risk, Ethan replied with a smile. But with the right contacts and strategic planning, we can minimize losses and maximize gains. Jonathan, sitting on the other side of the table, frowned. He wasn't convinced. We need to evaluate this more carefully. Diversification is important, but shifting significant capital to startups is a dangerous move. Ethan remained calm, but there was a slight tone of disdain in his voice when he responded. With all due respect, Jonathan, the future of business is in bold moves, not in maintaining the status quo. William intervened, placing his hand on the table. Jonathan, let's allow Ethan to develop this idea. I want a detailed plan in a week. Ethan smiled internally. Every small step was part of something bigger. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan continued to solidify his position as an indispensable figure. He made sure to please William in public, reinforcing his position as the protected one and right-hand man. Behind the scenes, however, his manipulation was relentless. One night, during a dinner with William, Ethan began to plant subtle doubts about Jonathan. You know, William, I respect Jonathan a lot, but sometimes I wonder if he's keeping up with the pace of changes in the market. William raised an eyebrow. What do you mean by that? Ethan shrugged, as if hesitant to continue. Nothing specific. It's just that, in some meetings, it seems like he prefers to slow down innovations rather than accept them. William laughed. That's Jonathan. He's conservative, but he always has the company's best interests at heart. Sure, I understand, Ethan replied, lowering his gaze as if reluctant. I just think sometimes we need a more progressive vision. The conversation ended there, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Ethan knew he needed to undermine the relationship between William and Jonathan to isolate the magnate. Over time, Ethan began to gain access to more sensitive areas of the company. He started reviewing contracts, discussing partnerships, and even negotiating directly with investors. This gave him access to critical information, like the most confidential financial data and the company's structural vulnerabilities. One afternoon, he was in the IT room overseeing the transfer of important data. One of the technicians casually remarked, I've never seen a strategic consultant have so much access, Mr. Scott. Ethan smiled, but his response was sharp. When you work directly with the CEO, doors open. Jonathan, ever observant, began to notice small inconsistencies, reports that vanished, decisions that seemed to hurt the company in the long term. During a conversation with William, he expressed his concerns. William, I think Ethan is taking too many liberties. He has access to information that no other consultant should have. William shook his head impatiently. Jonathan, Ethan has been crucial to the progress we've made in recent months. He's young, but he has vision. Vision isn't everything. Jonathan insisted. I'm saying something's off. He's moving funds in ways that don't make sense. William sighed, frustrated. I'll monitor this, but I'm not going to condemn someone based on assumptions. Ethan has my trust. Jonathan left the room, dissatisfied. He knew he needed more evidence before convincing William. Meanwhile, in the apartment Ethan had rented in New York, he sat alone in an armchair, looking out at the city view. He held a crumpled photo of his mother, Mary Scott, and the voice of his childhood echoed in his mind. You're special, Ethan. One day, they'll notice you. He gripped the photo tightly. Well, Mom, now they'll notice. Although Ethan had moments of doubt, his anger pushed him forward. He had been relegated to obscurity for years, while William grew up in a world of privilege. Now, he had the power to change everything. The second phase of his plan was about to begin, and William Carter's world would never be the same. The morning sun illuminated William Carter's luxurious office, reflecting off the mahogany furniture and walls filled with corporate awards. William sat at his desk, staring at an old family photograph. He seemed lost in thought when Jonathan entered, with a serious expression. William, Are you sure it's wise to keep trusting Ethan this much? Jonathan asked, closing the door behind him. William sighed, putting the photo aside. Jonathan, we've had this conversation. Ethan is complicated, but he's been an asset to the company. Jonathan crossed his arms. Maybe, but you're ignoring the signs. He's gaining influence way too fast. And maybe that's something I've allowed. William stared at his friend. I carry the guilt of growing up as my father's only recognized son, while Ethan was left on the sidelines with nothing. Maybe it's time to make things right. Jonathan frowned, surprised. What are you saying? William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. I'm thinking of giving Ethan a minority stake in the company, not just as recognition for his work, but as a way to repair the past. Jonathan fell silent for a few moments, processing what he had just heard. Finally, he responded, You have a bigger heart than most, William. But I suggest you be careful. Not everyone sees forgiveness the way you do. That afternoon, Ethan was called to William's office. He walked in with his usual confident demeanor, but the warm look on William's face made him slightly uneasy. Ethan, sit down. We need to talk. Ethan complied, trying to hide his nervousness. What's going on, William? I've been thinking a lot about the company's future. William leaned forward, hands clasped together, and, more importantly, about your role here. Ethan kept his expression neutral, but his heart raced. Go on. William smiled. You've been a key part of the growth we've seen in recent months. Your ideas are bold, your dedication unquestionable, and, honestly, I see in you huge potential. Ethan couldn't help but smile slightly, but he felt doubt creeping into his thoughts. That's why I want to offer you a minority stake in the company. William continued. It's not just a recognition of what you've done, but also a signal that I trust you to be part of the future of this legacy. Ethan's smile disappeared for a moment. He had come to Carter Enterprises with a clear goal, to destroy William and everything he represented. But this offer, it was unexpected. William, Ethan started, choosing his words carefully. This is generous, to say the least. But why? William sighed, hesitating before responding. I think you deserve it. And, to be honest, I feel like I should make it up to you in some way. Ethan furrowed his brow. Make it up? For what? William looked away for a moment. He wasn't ready to reveal the truth, not yet. Let's just say I want to make sure you know how much you're valued here. Ethan stayed silent, battling with a mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to accept the offer, to believe that William truly saw him as an equal. But another part, fueled by years of resentment, screamed at him to go forward with his plan. Later, in Ethan's apartment, he stared at the screen of his computer, where the details of his plan were meticulously organized. He had come so far, and the second phase was about to begin. Yet, William's words echoed in his mind. He picked up the photo of his mother again, murmuring, Mom, I promised I'd get justice for you. But he's not what I thought. Ethan began to question his motivations. From the beginning, he believed William was just an extension of his father, a selfish man who had abandoned Mary Scott without looking back. But the William he had met seemed different, kind almost paternal. He closed his eyes, remembering a moment when his mother had spoken about forgiveness. Forgiving isn't for others, Ethan. It's for you. But forgiveness felt like a betrayal of everything he had endured. He slammed his hand on the desk, frustrated with himself. No, that's exactly what he wants me to think. That night, William invited Ethan to dinner at an exclusive restaurant. During the meal, William tried to establish a more personal connection. You never talk much about your family, Ethan. What was your childhood like? Ethan hesitated, picking up his glass of wine to buy himself time. It was simple. My mom was amazing, but we didn't have much. Just the essentials. William nodded, feeling the weight of Ethan's words. Your mom must have been a strong woman. Ethan smiled sadly. She was. There was something in the exchange that made Ethan feel exposed. He looked away, while William continued, "You know, Ethan, part of why I want you to have a stake in the company is because I see potential in you to lead something bigger. I want you to have what I had." Ethan stared at William, the dilemma growing in his heart. Back in his apartment, Ethan was consumed with uncertainty. He could feel William's kindness, something that complicated his plan for revenge. But the resentment still burned within him, like a flame that was hard to extinguish. He opened his laptop again and stared at the confidential files he had stolen. The next phase of his plan was within reach with a click. "Keep going or stop," he murmured to himself, staring at the screen. His finger hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. "Not yet," he told himself. The night was thick, and silence filled the Carter Enterprises building. Only the distant hum of the air conditioning filled the empty halls. In the main office, Ethan sat in front of a computer screen, his eyes fixed on the files he had just accessed. The security system had been more challenging than he had anticipated, but after months of planning, he finally had what he needed: financial data, exclusive contracts, and strategic information that could destabilize the company. Each click seemed to echo like thunder in his head. He breathed deeply, trying to ignore the voice in his mind questioning his motivations. At that moment, there was no room for doubt. The opportunity to destroy William and the Carter family legacy was within his grasp. Ethan adjusted his glasses and began transferring the data to an encrypted drive. The plan was simple: send this information, along with the files he had already stolen, to a competing company willing to pay millions for any advantage over Carter Enterprises. This move would not only put Ethan in a comfortable financial position, but also cause an unprecedented collapse of the company. Suddenly, a noise made him stop. He looked around, but the office remained empty. "I'm becoming paranoid," he thought, returning to his typing. He didn't know that, at that very moment, Jonathan was downstairs, reviewing access records to the system. Something didn't seem right. Jonathan, who had suspected Ethan from the beginning, had decided to act on his own. He was reviewing the security system logs when he noticed a series of unusual access entries linked to Ethan's login. His eyes narrowed as he analyzed the data. This wasn't just a regular search. Ethan was accessing folders that even directors didn't have permission to view. Jonathan's heart raced. He knew he needed to verify what was happening, but he also knew he had to be careful. Without wasting time, he grabbed his phone and called William directly. The call took longer than expected to be answered, but finally, William picked up with a groggy voice. "Jonathan, it's almost 2 in the morning. What's going on?" "William, you need to come to the office right now," Jonathan said, trying to remain calm. "I think we have a serious problem. It involves Ethan." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ethan? What does he have to do with this?" "I don't want to make accusations without proof, but I believe he's accessing confidential information." Jonathan replied firmly, "This could be much bigger than we thought." William hesitated, confusion and exhaustion evident in his voice. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there." Jonathan hung up, but the unease in his chest wouldn't let him stop. He knew every second was crucial. Without waiting, he headed to the main floor, trying to act discreetly. In William's office, Ethan remained focused, but anxiety was beginning to take over. He kept checking the clock, aware that time was against him. When he heard the elevator approaching, panic set in. He quickly ended the transfer, disconnected the drive, and hid it in his blazer pocket. Jonathan entered the room, eyes fixed on Ethan. "Working late, aren't you, Ethan?" he said, trying to sound casual but with a firm look. Ethan forced a smile. "You know how it is. Big ideas don't wait for business hours." Jonathan crossed his arms, evaluating every move the young man made. "And these ideas involve accessing confidential files?" Ethan's smile disappeared and his expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jonathan stepped forward, the tension between the two growing. "Don't pretend, Ethan. I saw the records. You were accessing data that even William doesn't review regularly. What are you doing?" Ethan stood up, trying to maintain his composure. Maybe you should mind your own business, Jonathan. My business is protecting this company. Jonathan retorted, his tone becoming more aggressive, and protecting William. Before the argument could continue, William entered the room, his expression serious. What's going on here? Jonathan turned to him, pointing at Ethan. I was reviewing the access logs and found that Ethan has been violating the security systems. He's been tampering with confidential files. William looked at Ethan, disbelief written all over his face. Ethan, is this true? Ethan hesitated, trying to think of an excuse, but he knew he was cornered. I can explain. Then explain, William demanded, crossing his arms. Ethan's silence was deafening. He knew there was no justification that could convince them at that moment. Ethan, why would you do this? William asked, his voice filled with sorrow. I trusted you. Jonathan interrupted, frustration evident. William, we need to see what he got. If he was transferring data, we might still be able to save the company. William nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Ethan. I want to hear it from him first. He stepped forward, staring at the young man. Ethan, you owe me this. Ethan felt the weight of the situation, the anger and guilt waging an internal battle. He slowly took the drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. I haven't done anything yet. William took the drive, but didn't take his eyes off Ethan. Not yet. What were you planning to do? Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the ground collapse beneath him. Before he could continue, Jonathan grabbed the drive from William's hands and connected it to the computer. As the files loaded, the magnitude of what Ethan had was made clear. William, he had everything, Jonathan said in a low voice. Financial data, contracts, even future plans. William closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the betrayal hitting him hard. Why, Ethan? He asked, his voice breaking. Ethan didn't answer, unable to meet William's eyes. The tension in the room was immense, and the bond they had built was beginning to fracture. The office felt like an emotional battlefield. William stood rigid, his body tense, as though holding back an internal explosion. Ethan, sitting in the chair across from him, crossed his arms in an attempt to maintain his composure, but his eyes betrayed the intensity of his emotions. Between them, the truth finally revealed pulsed like an open wound. William was the first to speak, his voice heavy. Ethan, I need to understand. Why? Why would you do this after everything we built together? Ethan let out a short, bitter laugh. After everything we built together? He shook his head. William, do you really think this was about building something together? From the start, all I did was find the best way to destroy you. The words were like blades, but William endured them, standing firm. This doesn't make sense. I gave you everything. I trusted you. Everything? Ethan retorted, his voice rising. You gave me a stake in the company because you thought you could buy me, compensate me. But you have no idea what it's like not to have a father. The father who only gives money for the basics but never wants to see you, doesn't want any closeness. You also don't know what it's like to grow up with nothing while you lived in luxury. William crossed his arms, feeling his anger begin to bubble up. You think I don't know what it's like to lose something? You think my life was perfect just because I grew up with money? Ethan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Yes, it was. You had everything my mother and I never had. She worked for your father, cleaning up your mess, while you used her and discarded her like trash. And I know you've already investigated everything because I saw when the investigator came here. And I know you already know I'm your half-brother. William felt Ethan's words like a punch to the stomach. He had heard rumors about his father's behavior, but he had never known the details, never understood the devastating impact it had on the lives of others. I didn't know he had another child until you showed up and I had your life investigated. Normally, I do that with employees who work directly with me, but with you, it was different. Before investigating, I already thought you looked a lot like him. William said, his voice wavering. If you had known what? Ethan interrupted, his voice full of venom. Would you have done anything? Don't fool yourself, William. You wouldn't have done anything. You were the perfect heir, the son he loved and shaped. You would have ignored this just like you ignored so many other things. William felt the anger rise, but he kept his composure. He knew Ethan was hurt, and as hard as it was, he needed to listen. You're right, William said, finally. I ignored a lot of things. My father wasn't a good man, Ethan. He did things I can't justify. But that doesn't mean I am him. Ethan laughed again, but there was fragility in that laugh. You're not him? Then why are you so comfortable with the empire he built? Why didn't you ever question the things he did? Because I was young, William replied, his voice now firmer. And because for a long time, I didn't want to see the truth. But when I took over this company, I knew I had to do things differently. And that's what I've been trying to do. Ethan went silent, his eyes evaluating William. He wanted to find something false in his brother's words, a lie to justify his hatred. But what he saw was sincerity, and that unsettled him. That doesn't erase what happened to my mother, Ethan said, his voice quieter this time. She died believing she was nothing, that she would never be anything. William stepped forward, his expression now a mix of anger and sadness. I can't change what happened to her, Ethan, but I can try to fix what's happening now. Ethan stood up, finally facing William. And how do you think you're going to fix this? Give me another stake in the company? A higher position? Do you think that will erase years of pain? William shook his head slowly. No, I don't think that will erase anything. But I want you to know you don't have to go on alone. You don't have to destroy everything to find peace. Ethan laughed, but this time there was a note of desperation in his laughter. Peace? You think this is about peace? This is about justice, William. Justice? William shot back, his voice rising for the first time. What you're doing isn't justice. It's revenge. And revenge won't bring your mother back. Ethan blinked, surprised by William's harshness. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. William continued, now calmer. I'm sorry, Ethan, for everything, for what my father did, for what you've been through, for what I didn't see. But you need to decide what you want for the future. Ethan turned away, William's words piercing through the layers of anger he had carried for years. He knew there was truth in them, but the resentment was still too strong to disappear so easily. I don't know what to do now, Ethan admitted, his voice quiet. William moved closer, placing his hand on his brother's shoulder. Then let's figure it out together. Ethan stood still, feeling the weight of the moment. For the first time, he realized there was another option besides destruction, an option he had never considered. The silence between them was heavy, but less hostile. Both knew this was just the beginning of a long journey, but for the first time, it seemed there was a chance for redemption. The main office of Carter Enterprises was filled with an almost palpable tension. The dawn was just beginning to break, but the bright lights of the room made it feel as if time was suspended. William sat at his desk, his face stern, weighed down by the night. In front of him, Ethan stood hesitantly, as if his mere presence were an affront. On the desk, the small USB drive with confidential information seemed like a cursed object, laden with secrets and betrayals. Ethan took a deep breath, gathering courage to speak. I brought it back. The one Jonathan grabbed was just one. I had this other one at home. He pointed to the drive. His voice, usually confident, now felt fragile. It's all there. I didn't delete anything. I didn't share anything. William looked at the drive, but didn't grab it immediately. He crossed his arms, fixing his gaze on his brother. Why now, Ethan? After everything you've done, why return this to me? The question was simple, but the answer was a tangled mess of emotions. Ethan hesitated, staring at the floor as if the words were trapped there. Because you were right. He lifted his eyes, and the sincerity in his tone was evident. All all this revenge, it won't bring my mother back. It won't change what happened. William finally stood up, resting his hands on the desk, as if needing stability to endure what he was hearing. You understand what this means, don't you? He spoke, his voice heavy with exhaustion. You broke my trust, Ethan. You broke something that took months to build. Besides, I could have you put in jail for corporate espionage. Ethan nodded slowly, the shame weighing heavily on his shoulders. I know, and I don't expect you to trust me again. I don't even know if I deserve that. William stayed silent for a few moments, as if weighing every word before responding. Finally, he took the drive from the desk, but didn't put it away. He just held it in his hand, looking at the object as if it were the physical representation of betrayal. What did you hope to achieve, Ethan? Destroy the company? Destroy me? William's voice was harsh, but there was an underlying sadness Ethan couldn't ignore. And then what? What would you have? Ethan looked at his brother, his eyes full of guilt and regret. I don't know. I just wanted you to feel what I felt. Years of anger, of frustration, of being ignored. William let out a short, humorless laugh. He stepped away from the desk, walking toward the large window that offered a view of the city. You think I don't know what it's like to feel anger, Ethan? To feel like you'll never be enough? My father shaped me from a young age to be like him. And for years, I followed the path he set for me. Not because I wanted to, but because I thought I had no choice. Ethan was surprised by the confession. William had always seemed invincible, a man who controlled everything around him. Seeing this vulnerability unsettled him. I didn't know you felt like that. Ethan admitted, his voice softer. It's not something I like to admit. William replied, still looking out the window. But it's the truth. My father, he was a difficult man, relentless, ambitious, selfish. He did things I could never defend. And what he did to your mother is at the top of that list. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat as William mentioned his mother. She deserved more than that. She was an incredible woman. William turned, finally facing his brother. And you too, he said, his tone firm. That's why, Ethan, I won't let you destroy yourself because of this anger. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes filled with emotion. I don't know how to change, William. I spent so long planning this, feeding this anger. William moved closer, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. Then let it go. You don't have to carry that weight alone. Ethan looked at his brother, his words echoing in his mind. He realized that, for the first time, someone was offering something beyond judgment or disdain. William was offering forgiveness. Are you really willing to give me another chance? Ethan asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Yes, William replied without hesitation. Not because it's easy, but because it's the right thing. He returned to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a contract. When he placed it in front of Ethan, the young man looked at him in confusion. What's this? It's an offer. William replied, I want you to have a significant stake in the company, not just as a sign of trust, but as part of what we're building. Ethan looked at the contract and then at William, unable to believe what he was hearing. After everything I've done, you still want me to be part of this? We're brothers, Ethan. William said simply, and as brothers, we'll build something better together. Ethan took the pen with trembling hands. He hesitated for a moment, but then signed the contract, feeling as if he were signing a new beginning for his life. Thank you, he said, his voice full of emotion. William gave a small smile. Don't thank me yet. We've got a lot of work to do. That afternoon, during a meeting with the company's top executives, William announced Ethan's official integration as a partner. He spoke firmly about the importance of learning from the past and moving forward with integrity and unity. As the applause echoed through the room, William and Ethan exchanged a meaningful look. There was no more anger or resentment, just a shared determination to build a better future. The sun illuminated the Manhattan skyline as William and Ethan, for the first time in a long time, shared a peaceful morning in the main meeting room of Carter Enterprises. Since the reconciliation, the two have been working together on projects that reflected both of their values: corporate responsibility and sustainable innovation. Despite this, the residual distrust within the company still lingered in the air. Not all executives were convinced that Ethan deserved a prominent role. However, that moment of calm was interrupted by an urgent call from the legal department. William answered, and his expression immediately changed. "Who?" he asked in disbelief. He paused and looked at Ethan, who immediately felt something was wrong. "All right, schedule a meeting immediately." As soon as he hung up, William ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "What happened?" Ethan asked, feeling his stomach tighten. William crossed his arms, staring at his brother. "Thomas Grayson. He's back." Ethan frowned. The name didn't sound familiar. "Who is Thomas Grayson?" William scoffed. "One of our father's biggest rivals. Years ago, he tried to take over one of Carter Enterprises' subsidiaries, but my father publicly humiliated him, ending his career in the corporate sector." Ethan leaned forward, intrigued. "And what does he want now?" William clenched his fists. "It looks like he has information about the company's past, and about you." Ethan felt the blood run cold. "What exactly does he know?" William sighed, his face serious. "He discovered your mother's involvement with our father, and he's threatening to take it to the press, exposing Carter Enterprises as an empire built on secrets and exploitation." Ethan fell silent for a moment, processing the words. Anger began to bubble up inside him, not just from the attack on the company, but also from the memory of his mother. "Does he want money?" "No," William replied. "He wants to destroy the company. This is personal." Ethan stood up, his gaze determined. "Then we need to stop him." 2 days later, a meeting was arranged between William, Ethan, and Thomas Grayson at a luxury hotel in Manhattan. Grayson was a man in his early 50s, with a predatory smile and eyes that always seemed to be assessing the environment. He shook William's hand with exaggerated force, completely ignoring Ethan, as if wanting to make it clear that he wasn't worthy of being there. "William, it's good to see you," Grayson said with a sarcastic tone. "And this must be your new partner, the bastard son?" Ethan felt his blood boil, but William placed a hand on his shoulder, signaling him to stay calm. "Let's get to the point, Grayson. What do you want?" William asked, his tone cold and professional. Grayson laughed, leaning back in his chair. "I want justice. I want everyone to know how Carter Enterprises was built. I want to see your empire crumble like mine did." Ethan finally intervened, leaning forward. "My mother wasn't part of the dirty game you and Robert Carter played, Grayson. Keep her name out of this." Grayson raised an eyebrow, amused by Ethan's boldness. "Ah, the loyal son. Interesting how now you defend the company you tried to destroy." "I know everything. The corporate world finds out everything." William intervened before Ethan lost control. "Grayson, you can try whatever you want, but we won't yield to your threats." Grayson smiled coldly. "This isn't a threat, William. It's a promise. Get ready, because in 48 hours, your precious name will be on every headline." He stood up and left the room, leaving the two brothers in a silence heavy with tension. Back at the office, William and Ethan gathered the legal and PR teams to devise a strategy. But Ethan knew playing defense wouldn't be enough. "He won't stop, William," Ethan said, crossing his arms. "If we want to win this, we need to attack him first." "Attack him how?" William asked. Ethan walked to the window, looking out at the city as if formulating a plan. "Thomas Grayson built a reputation as the man your father destroyed. But no one ever investigated what he was doing before that. What if he's not as innocent as he wants to seem?" William furrowed his brow, starting to understand Ethan's point. "You think he has skeletons in the closet? Everyone does." Ethan replied with an ironic smile. "They hired private investigators to dig up information on Grayson, and what they found was a gold mine. Before his fall, He had been accused of embezzling funds from investors and engaging in unethical practices in his own companies. All of that had been covered up, but the evidence still existed. When Grayson released the first accusations against Carter Enterprises, including information about Mary Scott, William and Ethan were already ready. They held a press conference in which William acknowledged the company's past mistakes, but made it clear that the new leadership was committed to transparency and justice. Ethan then took the stage and revealed Grayson's unethical practices, exposing him as a hypocrite who had used other people's suffering to fuel his personal revenge. Grayson tried to retaliate, but his credibility was already destroyed. Public pressure and new investigations forced him to back down. After the confrontation, Ethan and William left the company building together. For the first time, Ethan felt like he was really part of something bigger than himself. "You handled that well," William said, giving his brother a pat on the back. Ethan smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you." The two brothers looked at the city, knowing that, while challenges would still come, they would face them together and stronger than ever. Carter Enterprises had suffered a decline due to the revelations of the past and these corporate battles. They lost a lot of money, but through hard work and the unity of the brothers, they managed to rise again, and the company became a giant in the corporate world once more.